Hello, this is Zahirul Alam. Welcome you all on Frankly Speaking. British country representative of the Department for International Development, DFID, Mr. Chris Austin, is our guest today. He arrived in Dhaka on 12th August last year. Bangladesh is DFID's second largest country program. Chris Austin has worked for the British government in a number of roles over the last 24 years, both in the Treasury, the UK's Finance Ministry, and DFID. Prior to his arrival, he worked at DFID's London headquarters as Deputy Director for the Africa Division. DFID is a British ministry responsible for the UK's contribution towards international efforts to eliminate poverty. Thank you very much, Chris, for joining on Frankly Speaking.
Thank you for having me, Zahir.
Chris, we'll certainly be discussing some issues related to the UK and Bangladesh's interest and your development projects, programs. Do you think that the UK and Bangladesh's relationship is getting closer day by day?
I think it's really strong. I like to think there's three very strong ties that bind us together. There's our shared culture. There's a lot of Bangladeshis in the UK, first, second, third generation, maybe 500,000. There's our shared interest in cuisine, particularly curries. And my favourite restaurant where I live in the UK is run by Sylheti Bangladeshis. And there's cricket, which I think is a very unifying interest. In terms of Britain's political development relationship, it's long-standing. It's going to continue. I think we are getting closer together whilst respecting our individual identities.
Yeah, Chris, we know that the UK is the largest grant donor to Bangladesh and contributing around £120 million in a year.
It's slightly less than that this year, but it will be rising to £150 million in 2010-11. And after that, subject to decisions by ministers in the UK to what our allocation would be.
But you said there's slightly less this year. What is the reason? Because
sorry, it's a slightly lower figure than the one you described. It's not a reduction. We dispersed about £128 million in our last financial year.
Okay.
And that was higher than the budget allocation for two reasons. One was we received additional money to help with flood and cyclone relief.
Okay.
And the other was that in the way that DFID as a ministry balances its books at the end of the financial year, there was some slippage in programs in other countries that meant that because we have a very strong portfolio in Bangladesh, we were able to accelerate a little bit some spending last year. So the budget for this financial year is 114 million.
Okay. So would you please tell me in brief about what are the guiding principles of DFID for Bangladesh in particular to extend your development assistance?
Okay, well, I think the first thing to say is that our support is to help Bangladeshis transform their lives and their life opportunities. And that's been the tenet of our assistance since independence. Secondly, we want to support the government of Bangladesh's strategy for the country on economic and social affairs. So all of our assistance is committed in line with the poverty reduction strategy. And thirdly, we want to get the best impact, the best value for money for British taxpayers' money, both bilaterally from the UK, but also the multilateral contributions that DFID is responsible for through the World Bank, through the Asian Bank, through the European Commission, through the United Nations family.
But what do you think the DFID's assistance or the amount of development grant in Bangladesh have affected Bangladesh's effort to in their poverty reduction efforts in Bangladesh? What do you think about that?
I hope that we...
Did it significantly contributed for the...
I hope that we can rightly claim some contribution to the very significant improvements that Bangladesh has made in reducing poverty. Over the last 10, 12 years, the growth rate has been between 5 and 6% in the country, and poverty is reduced more or less by 1 percentage point each year. Now that's a very impressive record when you consider that The country has gone through different climatic shocks and economic shocks over that period. The population has grown. Climate change is already having effects on the country, and yet it's had sustained high growth rates, which would be the envy of many countries. It's had sustained reduction in poverty, increase in jobs, improvement in things like maternal health, a 22% reduction in maternal deaths over the last 15 years, increase in enrolment in primary education for boys and girls, new jobs created, as I mentioned. Now the UK has been providing significant amounts of grant assistance directed at all of those things, working with government, working with civil society.
But what is the present scenario? The growth rate is being slowed down due to various reasons, especially the last year the huge cyclone has hit in the coastal area, and then the economic shock in the developed world. And so do you apprehend that the growth rate would affect Bangladesh in the coming days, and this will obliquely slow down the poverty reduction effort of Bangladesh?
I think there's some definite risks there. There are much better qualified analysts than me looking at the implications of the financial crisis globally, and specifically for least developed countries and developing countries. Bangladesh has been relatively unaffected by the first round of shocks, if you like, because wisely the Bangladesh Bank had moved its deposits from the Bank of Wachovia to another agency before that bank got into difficulties. But more substantively, the financial sector here is not hugely exposed to global financial flows. There are risks of the secondary effects, though. Things like reductions in the oil price having an impact on building prospects in the Middle East, which in turn could affect the market for Bangladeshi building workers who send back remittances to the country. The exchange rate, now that's changed an awful lot, the pound is plummeting against the dollar and the taka in equal measure, is having a direct impact on the cost of Bangladesh exports to the UK and other markets that might have an impact on jobs and growth here. I think the government, I think another thing to say about the last 12 months actually is that the caretaker administration and the Bangladesh population at large have coped remarkably well with both the financial and the natural challenges thrown at it, which I think is testimony to the almost innate resilience and resourcefulness that I've witnessed around the country.
Chris, you know that the caretaker administration is going to hold an election very soon, possibly within the next month, 2008. So how do you see the coming days? I mean, after the democratic transition, a new government comes into power, and what will be your focus from the DFID? I mean, the British government, how they are planning to work with the next government?
It's a very timely question for us, because we had been preparing a long-term development strategy for Bangladesh in the second half of 2006 and effectively paused that because of the interim administration. That didn't mean that our development activities were paused or lessened in any way. But looking ahead over the next 5 years, we look forward to having discussions with the next elected government about their priorities for creating jobs, improving access and availability and quality of basic health services, basic education services, basic water and sanitation, developing further the private sector enabling environment for both domestic and foreign investment. All of the things that one would expect a democratically elected government wanting to have a handle on. We're also keen to work with the next elected government on further strengthening the institutions of democracy. There's been much talk about that in recent weeks, that this is part of the opportunity that the interim period has created for Bangladesh to take democratic institutions like parliamentary scrutiny committees, like the briefings that members of parliament and members of cabinet have, the roles that opposition spokesmen will have on things, take those issues to the next level, so that in the words of Abraham Lincoln, who I was listening to his words at a Remembrance Day service on Friday at Camilla, that Bangladesh moves on to an even stronger government of the people, for the people, by the people. I think those words have resonance for all of us still today, not just in Bangladesh.
Okay, Chris, you also mentioned that Bangladesh is making huge progress in many areas, and it needs a government or democracy which is by the people, for the people, of the people. But definitely, how optimistic you are about holding a participatory election through which a good political or democratic transition will be held after December 2008?
Well, I think it's a question that's really better put to Bangladesh people and the participants in that election, who are the candidates for office, the election commission, and the people who will be voting. But from where I'm sitting as a very interested observer of Bangladesh politics, I think the preparations have been exemplary in terms of the electoral roll with voter ID, done in a pretty spectacular record time for any country, in terms of the preparations that are being done by the Election Commission to get everything ready for the national elections. It seems that the mayoral votes in August were a good dry run of how these things would be conducted under the new arrangements. So I'm very optimistic that Bangladesh will be ready to have an election that everybody participates in, that is free of violence, that is free of what I've heard locally described as muscle and money, so everybody is able to cast their vote at the ballot box in safety and in secrecy, and that will lead to an elected government and an elected opposition that will then take Bangladesh to the next phase of its still fairly short history as an independent country. Okay,
but do you believe that the last 22 months caretaker administration has successfully initiated or could initiate the, what is the desired goal is to establish a society with good governance, and everybody is looking at the good governance. So how did you observe this caretaker administration's role in establishing or initiating sort of way forward to the good governance?
I've only, as you said at the start of the introduction,
they wanted corruption-free society, they wanted many things.
Yeah, I've only been here myself since August, so my experience is all under the caretaker administration, but from what I've been briefed on and studied and talked to people in Bangladesh about and colleagues in the UK, suggests that there's been actually quite a long-standing effort by successive governments and civil society in Bangladesh to improve the quality of governance in the country, so that contracts can be tendered and issued without collusion, without bribery, that people can access basic social services without having to pay a speed payment to get to them, that there is transparency about allocations of government expenditure and how that money is spent and what it achieves. Under the caretaker administration, I think there's been some very significant steps forward, even within the mandate that a caretaker administration is allowed to have here. So the independence of the Election Commission, the Public Service Commission, separation of the judiciary and the executive.
In paper.
Independence. In paper so far, there is more to do on that as on other reforms. The independence of the Anti-Corruption Commission, the establishment of the Human Rights Commission. All of these things are very important, positive developments. And I think the opportunity for whichever government takes office after the elections is to build on those and to take the reforms, if you like, the strengthening of those institutions to the next level. I think what I've observed during my time here is a very, very free, vibrant and quite lively debate amongst civil society and population about the issues of politics. I mean, politics is, by its roots in its origins as a Greek word, is all about people.
But there is no discussions about the manifestos of the political parties yet, when the election is only 4 weeks away.
That's different to what we have just observed in the United States and what one would expect to see in the UK. But I think that
what happens to your country?
In our country, I think manifestos would be published when an election date is announced, and then there's a period of 4 to 6 weeks of campaigning. But during a government period, as we're seeing today, with a healthy debate in the British Parliament between the government and the opposition about what the right policy responses are to the international financial crisis as it affects the world and as it affects different parts of the United Kingdom. Similar sorts of debates in the US.
Yeah.
Now, I think the next elected government will have a sound foundation of these institutions, but there will be more things to do to ensure that governance in its broader sense gets stronger in Bangladesh, so it becomes a safe and prosperous country for Bangladeshis and an attractive place for investors. Because I think that the real challenge for Bangladesh economically is to get from 5–6% growth a year to 8–9%. And that growth will have a real step change in poverty levels. I mean, poverty has come down 1% every year for the last decade, but there's still 55 million people. That's about the population of the UK, more or less. Wow. 55 million people living on less than $1 a day, less than 50–60 takas a day.
It's a very small picture. Chris, very quickly, we know that by next year, I think the mid of next year, you will be initiating a new country assistance paper. 5 years span country assistance paper. What will be the focus of your CAP starting next year?
Well, the focus will continue to be, as I mentioned earlier, how can British grant assistance and technical advice and policy work help have the best contribution on transforming lives and life opportunities for ordinary Bangladeshis, particularly those 55 million that I just referred to, but also there's an additional 30 million who are living on less than $2 a day. How we will do that, we will want to talk to the next elected government about the specifics, but we have at the moment a committed portfolio of programmes of about £1 billion with durations of between 1 year and 9 years. So those things will continue in the first few years of the next period. They're focused at improving basic health services so that pregnant women can have the costs of a bus journey and medical treatment when they're in labour and can have safe deliveries. If I may continue, that people in slum areas can have access to clean drinking water, can have better access to latrines.
So basically health, education,
climate change.
Climate change.
We have a number of programs that are helping at the household level people deal with the implications today of climate change.
Okay, Chris, we're almost at the end of our program. So very quickly, two things. One is, you also believe that Bangladesh is a land of masses of potential and still with a lot of some challenges. So do you view what are the potentials and what are the major challenges right now?
I think the potential I've witnessed in visits I've done to different parts of the country, from Rangpur in the northwest down to Chowkhali in the south, the potential is the human capital in the country. The individuals have proved themselves resilient to all sorts of climate challenges, but they're very creative at building things, making things, growing things. I think raising the capacity of the labour market through English language skills, through technical and vocational skills for jobs in Bangladesh and jobs abroad is a huge potential. That's resilience and resourcefulness. I think the challenges are that people outside Bangladesh might have a negative perception of the country and might view Bangladesh as a country that gets some pretty bad floods and is in the wrong place when cyclones happen in the Bay of Bengal.
This is our responsibility to alleviate those perceptions.
I think brand Bangladesh could become much more positive. It's a vibrant place. The British Bangladesh Chamber of Commerce was just here last week. Some 40 investors looking to make new investments in the country.
So how do you feel in Bangladesh right now?
I feel at home and very happy. I'm learning every day something a little bit more about the country, and I hope I'm beginning to make a contribution.
Thank you very much, Chris Austin, for your time and joining us on Frankly Speaking.
Thank you, Zahir.
Dear viewers, globalization is an opportunity for Bangladesh. The principle of cooperation is let's work together to grasp the opportunity. We hope and we believe that the development partners or agencies like DFID can help countries like Bangladesh to make our growth and poverty reduction efforts more inclusive. Thanks indeed for watching our program, and we hope to see you on our next episode. Until then, do take care and bye-bye.